when we are working with meditation, it is true that we are working with a part of ourselves that not many people understand very fully. It's like some people, they drive around in a car all day long, but they're not interested in what's going on underneath the bonnet. And if they're ever asked to have to fix anything, then they probably would get in some experts to do it for them. It's possible to go through life without really wondering what goes on beneath the surface. But once we start to become interested in meditation, it's as if we have to automatically start to pay some interest to what goes on underneath. Yeah? We have to start to be interested in how come it doesn't all go smoothly. Like, got a center of the body and we've got a mind which just like put the two together and hey presto, it should be like light switch going on. And it doesn't happen. Why is this? So maybe you need to take the car down to the garage. But it's like in our mind, it's not just all the things we want in there, but we've got a lot of rubbish in there as well. And the special name for such rubbish in technical words that come from Buddhism is unwholesomeness. Sometimes they call it unwholesomeness. Sometimes they call it temptations. And in the first part of this particular talk, which I've put as number 19 in our little series about blessings in life, and this one is to do with putting temptations behind us. It's the first subject where we're starting to deal directly with the mind in this series of talks. We talked about very gross sort of temptations which you can see in the outside world, which might be the things that you know are not good for you, but you want to do anyway. And all the struggle you go through in your mind when you're trying to do the right thing instead of to do the easy thing, that's what we talked about last time. But it turns out that not all the temptations or unwholesomeness affecting our mind are quite so easy to see. A lot of them are under the surface, under the bonnet of the car, hidden away in a place that you only get to know about if you start to do a meditation practice. And sometimes these things are being compared to rust in the mind, things that make things go rusty so that they don't work properly. Sometimes they have been compared to weeds growing in our garden when we prefer to have more useful vegetables growing. So if there were weeds in the mind, what do you think they would look like? If we look deep down in the mind, start to have a root around in there, we might see some weeds rather like this one. And some parts of the weeds are under the ground. You can see the roots there, and they come from 3 different roots. You can see of greed and hatred and delusions. So that's getting a little bit subtle already. So we don't normally see those bits at all, because they don't pop up above the ground. But what we do see is the plants that grow out of those roots to give their leaves of different colors. And sometimes in the meditation classes, I give a talk about what all those different colors of the leaves mean, but not today. Today is a slightly different subject, and I'm more interested in the size of the leaves. To talk about gross unwholesomeness, so the big leaves. Talk about the medium unwholesomeness, or the medium-sized leaves, and talk about the subtle unwholesomeness, which is the small leaves. So just to give you an idea, if we're talking about the big leaves, and this would relate to the sort of temptations that we talked about last time you saw me, it might be big things in our lives like being greedy or vengeful, or having a really sort of out-of-it worldview where the way you see the world is completely divorced from reality. a really distorted view of the world. Or it might be difficult or shocking things that have happened to you in your life that make it very hard for you to use your mind as it is meant to be used. Yeah? So gross ones. Done with them, okay? Talked about them last week. Today we're going to concentrate more on the medium ones, which are things like little niggling emotions in the mind, which might not affect our lives too much, but they certainly affect our ability to meditate properly. And they might be things like irritation, or spite, or doubt, or envy. And there might be even subtler ones, which would be the little leaves in there, which might include things like deviousness, or obstinacy, or desires of various sorts. Most of them kept secret, because they're very deep. And it's only through meditation that we can start to really study and work to uproot these little things in the mind that are the medium and subtle level of unwholesomeness. Without meditation, it's very hard to even recognize them, let alone deal with them. So today, what I'm going to talk about, which is sort of a continuation of what I talked about a couple of weeks ago, is how we can deal with the medium and the subtle ones, because it's a little bit different from just facing up to our temptations. Are you ready? So let's look first of all at the medium ones. So we need a slightly different set of strategies when it comes to the medium level ones, and we get a little bit more into the Buddhist side of things, because this is the sort of thing where Buddhists tend to be a little bit more specialist than just like self-help blogs. Yeah. So generally, the medium unwholesomeness is to do with things that pull our mind away from the center of the body when we're trying to meditate. So some of these are a special group that we all know about if we are regular meditators, called the 5 hindrances. Ring any bells? Oh, come on. Sense desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, which basically means falling asleep in meditation, absent-mindedness, and doubt, all the things that pull your mind away from the center, which you have to balance out in order that your mind becomes focused, one-pointed, and settled in the center of yourself. So all the things that we do with meditation are in fact beginning to iron out these mental hindrances, these medium level of unwholesomeness in the mind. They don't just happen when we are meditating, but as we go around and lead our normal lives, dealing with other things, we start to notice the things that trigger these medium level of unwholesomenesses as well. And if we're smart and if we're well versed in our meditation, then the mindfulness that we bring out of the meditation into other aspects of our life can help us to deal with those things before they get any deeper into the mind. For example, if you realize you're obsessing about something when you're, let's say, in your workplace, then you can bring your mind back to what you need to be thinking about instead of what you have been, your mind has got stuck on. You recognize that you can choose your thoughts. Yeah? Or, if someone's making you really angry, you might be able to use Samma Arahang as a way to calm yourself down before it gets any more firework. You get any more fireworks out of your anger. Yeah? Certainly, they are always connected with meditation, and the more you are a meditator, the more chance you have with dealing with this medium level of unwholesomeness than if you are totally unequipped. But of course we have good days and bad days, which you probably recognize the ups and downs on the roller coaster of mental quality that we have in our lives. As for the subtle level, well, we have what are known in Buddhism as fetters, or anusaya, things like sensual grasping or irritability, wrong view, doubt, and not just doubt as in the hindrances, but doubt maybe of things like, does there really have an afterlife or not? That sort of thing, not just doubt whether my meditation is going to work. Or things like looking down on other people, or grasping for future rebirths, or just ignorance generally. Quite hard ones to deal with. Sometimes they are, if you're comparing them to dirt instead of any other metaphors I've used, mostly dirt is pretty easy to see, right? Do you ever try wiping a mirror? You notice that somehow it suddenly becomes much clearer, because there's dirt on the mirror, sort of grime that you never normally notice. It's there the whole time. It's been there so long that you didn't realize it was there at all. But in fact, it's making your mirror duller. And it's not until you wipe it that you notice that it was there at all. It's that sort of level of grime in the mind that you're dealing with on the subtle level. If you're not a meditator, you have no chance of finding it at all. But high-level meditation, and often it's known as vipassana, would be used as a way to sort of gradually identify and remove those little subtle things from the mind. If you can't see them, then it's very hard to deal with them in the first place. It's like clearing out an attic where you have to get rid of all the big junk first before you see the little junk underneath. Little by little you can start to deal with that pinpointed. If you are a high-level meditator, then you have more chance of being able to do this sort of thing, and often it requires working with your human wisdom on deeper dimensions of yourself, on various levels of enlightenment. And it's those sorts of parts of yourself that you can use to uproot these very difficult to understand parts of ourselves. So it's not just something you can do sort of in a casual or amateur sort of way. Your mind needs to be of quite a firm level of attainment to be able to deal with those very subtle things. Because it's like the dirt is on the lens itself which you're using to look for them. Think of a metaphor, yes. So, is there some more advice that we can add to the sort of self-help blogs in order to bolster our sense of conscience to do the right thing rather than the easy thing? Well, some advice which comes more from the traditional scriptures is that we need to predict and prioritize the outcomes of our actions while thinking of long-term consequences. So, the sort of ready-made list that comes from Buddhism for thinking long-term. Last time we had things like, I'm not going to have the cake because it adds calories and then I'll have to go on a long diet afterwards. But Buddhism tends to look a little bit further than that, not just the next Weight Watchers meeting. Things like later regret, so I guess Weight Watchers might be in that one. Criticism, spoiled reputation, retribution from karma, so it's going to come back to bite you. Like the spending spree now seems like a great idea, but the bill will come at the end of the month. And future rebirths. Second thing which you might try also is to understand what lies beneath what is tempting you. It might be different for different people. For example, let's say you have a tendency to binge eat. You know what binge eating is? It's about the same as binge watching, but involves a fridge. If you notice, for example, that you always eat too much when you've had a conversation with a particularly difficult family member, then maybe you have your answer already. So maybe it's not the food at all, it's more about the stress that's being put on you by certain significant others, which you could deal with that part of the destructive behavior. Third thing you can do is to practice gratitude. We have a whole talk about gratitude coming up a little bit later down the line, but in brief, anything you can do to count your blessings generally helps to put you in a more powerful position when you are being pulled in the direction of something negative or unwholesome in your life. Just the fact that you got your mind in a positive frame of mind gives you much more momentum to pull in a different direction. Sometimes you can think of all the things which you might have on your New Year's resolutions list as a good place to start. But for Buddhism, they have a ready-made list of things which you can be grateful for, which anyone can use. Firstly, being a human being at all is a good place to start. Most people think that we just got here by accident, but in fact, if you realize how precious the opportunity you have as a human being to really change the world for something better or change yourself for something better, often we forget about this. Let's think if you were born as a maggot, like what chance would you have to change something in the world? Maybe you can sort of clear up your trash can or something, but that's about it. And generally, no one's going to thank you for it anyway. But as a human being, how much more can you do? You know, maybe you think it's not a great deal, but it's a whole lot more than many other life forms. So that's one place to start with being grateful. Secondly, you can think of your family, how you might be letting them down if you do something that's not quite the best you can be. A third thing is your age. You think, at my age, like I'm all of 9 years old, I ought to know better by now. Not like a little kid anymore. Or as you get older, then that sort of, you can add to that manifold. At my age, I ought to know better. Or you can think about your track record up till now, and you don't want to spoil it. Or you can think of your education, a person with my level of schooling ought to know better. Or you can think about your spiritual teachers. Every time you're about to do something really beneath yourself, you can think of, oh, but the monks would be disappointed with me, so I better stick to my guns. Yes. And we talked about drawbridges, I think, last time. Remember that part? Not letting down the drawbridge to temptations in your little castle. Castles are usually pretty impregnable unless you open the doors. And in the same way, not letting your guard down is a good way to avoid self-control issues. So if you notice the things where you don't have your wits about you, that tends to be when you are caught off your guard and tend to succumb to things that are tempting to you. For example, personally, I notice that I'm usually pretty much on an even keel, but jet lag gets the better of me. Usually I find myself in a really vulnerable position when I'm making that switch from jet lag. I'm not myself. Yeah. So that's generally a time when I would avoid making executive decisions, let's say. apparently for American diplomatic staff, they used to say 72 hours. You don't get to take an executive decision for 72 hours following a big journey, a long flight. And I think that probably stands. If you find your self-control energy levels are getting low, then you might need to realize at what point they are used up, and maybe don't put yourself in a situation where it's going to be difficult for you to continue on your even keel. And if you find that there's a lot of stress on you, then things like healthy eating habits can mean that you're not sort of hypoglycemic, and that's the reason for you letting your guard down. And avoiding stress generally. It's not just meditation that reduces stress, although we know about that, but other things like yoga or Tai Chi can also help to reduce stress levels so that it doesn't carry over into other tempting behaviors. So I'll finish off today with a little story. It's supposed to be a joke story, but I'll see just how far I can adapt it to still be funny. Okay. And it's about the importance of having a fully functioning conscience when it comes to self-control issues. So far so good? So it's about a man, probably in Tibet. He lived in the mountains somewhere with his wife. And one day, in a very pious sense of duty towards his spiritual quest, he decided to renounce the home life, so leave behind the family, leave behind his house, and go off and live in a cave in order to practice his meditation more deeply. Otherwise known as being a hermit, right? And it turns out his wife was not happy about this. The wife began to miss him. He was off in his cave and not helping with anything anymore. So she went and marched up to the cave and threatened to do away with herself if he continued with his 5 precepts nonsense. So you know what 5 precepts are, right? Didn't know 5 hindrances just now. Do you know 5 precepts? Not to steal things. Not to steal, not to misuse your senses or do something which is sexual misconduct, to refrain from wrong speech, and to refrain from intoxicants that cloud the mind, things like drinks or drugs or tobacco. 5 precepts. These are like moral ground rules which all Buddhists try to keep, because it covers most of the worst sorts of bad karma, if you can avoid them. So this is what he was doing in his cave, keeping these 5 precepts. So the wife says that she would do away with herself unless he gave up his 5 precepts nonsense. And she said, just as a gesture of goodwill, if you just break one of the precepts, then I will be okay with it. So he thought to himself, well, in order to save my wife's life here, I ought to choose one of the precepts that is probably the one that will do the least damage. So killing things doesn't sound very nice, right? Stealing things, definitely not nice. Messing around with other ladies, apart from the wife, not good. Telling lies, well, might be a little bit better. It doesn't actually hurt anyone directly. But then he decided that maybe the best one of all to break would be just to have a little bit of a sip of some wine. And in order that he could have a full choice, then in his cave there was a cow provided, there was a kolga provided, although it might be politically incorrect, and there was a bottle of wine. So he went for the wine. He thought, by drinking the wine, it's not going to hurt anyone else. My bottle, my throat, my stomach can't do any possible harm to anyone else. But after he'd had the first sip of wine, he quite enjoyed it. And he went on to have another sip of wine, and another, until the whole bottle had been drunk. And then that wasn't the end of it. Because once he drunk the wine, he wasn't thinking straight anymore. And when he wasn't thinking straight, he did lots of other things which he hadn't planned on before, like being cruel to the cow and embarrassing himself with the kolga. So in the end, just one thing actually led to breaking all of the 5 precepts. So in this particular case, which precept do you think is actually the most important of the lot? And the clue is, in any list that comes from Buddhism, generally the last one on the list is always the most important. Why? Because it undermines all the other ones if you can't use your conscience clearly to make the decision between what to do and what not to do. So at that point, when you are particularly vulnerable, then you tend to make all the worst decisions and give in to any temptations that happen to be passing your way. So in this particular case, it's supposed to be a funny story. I don't see anyone laughing very much. Okay, but the innocuous little 5th precept actually is the one that controls our ability to use our conscience. So actually it can undermine any previous self-control that we had in a way that it goes far beyond what we might expect. And in this sense, next time, whenever I get to give my next talk, we will come back to look particularly at the temptations that involve a physical dependency, which includes things like alcohol and drugs. And be looking particularly at those and Buddhist approaches to what to do about it. So some little announcements, especially for those who are new, are that if you enjoy meditation today and found it useful, then I would recommend that you try to meditate a little on your own each day, at home, maybe for 20 minutes or so, or if you are of an age that is less than 20, maybe take your age and multiply it by a number of minutes, and that will be about the good length of time for you to meditate daily in order to see some progress in your practice. So pick a time of day which is when you're not going to be interrupted and when you're feeling not too sleepy, and sit down to meditate. Sit down as a family if you like. That's generally a good way to make sure that you continue to see progress in your meditation. Sometimes you can remember the technique taught today, which is all well and good, but after a while it starts to become a little bit hazy, at which point you can fall back on things like the Mind Gem app, which is free to download on your cell phone, and you can listen to audio tracks which lead you through meditation of different lengths, all from teachers in a tradition which uses the center of the body. Here at the Meditation Center, we have classes in person every Tuesday and Thursday. The difference between Tuesday and Thursday is that generally on Tuesdays the meditation is a little bit shorter at 30 minutes instead of 45 minutes on a Thursday. And generally, those who are new would find it easier on the Tuesday night. Apart from that, on Saturdays we still have the remnant of the pandemic, which is that we have Zoom meditations between 7 and 8 on British time, where you get a little talk and a meditation, 20 minutes, half an hour, as part of the presentation. which is convenient for those who like to meditate from home. Also coming up on I think it's the 11th of October, not the 10th, we have a full moon meditation, which is meditation on a special Tuesday night class, but involves lighting candles of some sort on the theme of the end of Buddhist Lent. And this weekend we also have a weekend meditation retreat coming up, Friday night, Saturday and Sunday, finishing on the Sunday afternoon. Here people stay overnight here and practice meditation for 4 sessions a day. It's a good way to build up your meditation experience, especially for those who already have a daily practice. But the price of that is, I think, just £75 for the whole weekend. I'm not sure how they managed to keep the price so low. Maybe it's something to do with not having the evening meal, but it's probably cheaper than heating your home for the whole weekend, I would have thought.